Yes.
Did she nod?
She did.
Oh, okay.
Commissioner Schutte,
Here.
Commissioner Whitefield,
Here.
Commissioner Caldwell, Commissioner Wilkie McCulloch, Commissioner Kiever. A quorum is present.
Okay, at this time, if there's anybody, I'd like to invite anybody from the public to comment or discuss on any topic that is relevant to the Park and Recreation Commission. Is there anybody out there that would like to speak?
There's one caller on the line. Caller, when you hear the two beeps, it's your turn for public comment. Please state your name for the record.
My name is Lisa Taylor. Good evening. I serve as Carson City's Extension Educator on behalf of the University of Nevada, Reno. As your land-grant institution, we've served 104 years to provide education, conduct research, and offer outreach since 1917 to meet the needs of Carson City residents. Since the donation was accepted of land by the Ormsby County 4-H Council on June 7, 1963, by the Board of Commissioners, our 4-H members have held their 4-H club activities and events, and we in Cooperative Extension have held our family-friendly adult programs in its buildings and on its grounds. The special resolution that described this was 66-1, and it can be found in Book 15, pages 79 and 80. I want to thank the Carson City Board of Supervisors and Director Jen Budge and Nick Wentworth with the Carson City Parks and Recreation Department for the opportunity they offered our members, volunteers, and families to provide verbal recommendations and written responses to the master plan survey. As you can see from the documentation provided as background for tonight's presentation, our extension volunteers and program participants provided significant responses that are recorded on the consulting organization's report. One part of the report, though, that was surprising to me during my review was Note 13 that was associated with the existing exhibit hall. The note reads, ADA improvements to its upper level to tentatively house co-op extension. Now, while we are open to exploring this possibility, as yet I or anyone from UNR has not yet been invited to provide input on what is drawn on A 2.0, nor review what is suggested in the report. We look forward to listening to the Fuji Park Master Plan presentation and truly appreciate all the time and effort spent on it so far. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else out there that would like to comment?
There's no further comment at this time.
Thank you very much. I'm going to wait for Stacy to sit down. It's not a problem at all. Welcome. Okay, with that, we're going to move on to number 4, which is approval of the minutes. Did everybody take a look at the minutes, and are there any comments on the minutes from last meeting of February 2nd? Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
How do I turn my microphone on?
Second.
Okay, Mr. Whitefield, thank you, Commissioner Whitefield. So with that, can I have a vote on approving the minutes? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
Thank you. So we're going to move on to 5. So discussion only regarding playgrounds within Carson City Parks and Recreation System.
Sorry.
That's fine. Just figure
I'm
it out.
messing with my,
That's fine. So with that, Mr. Wentworth and Mr. Navarro are going to talk to us about that. Does anybody have any questions before we move forward? Okay. Dave, are you ready for that? Dave and Nick, tag team? All right, here we go.
Yeah, Nick, you're on your own. Sorry.
Sorry, playgrounds was first. So I know that it's been at the Board of Supervisors and the Parks Commission's request for a long time to have a long-term plan in place, and that's why we wanted to start working on this. And across Carson City, as you can see on the geographical map, we currently have 18 playgrounds that we are responsible for. They are extremely expensive to put in, as I'm sure most of you know. They're expensive to maintain, and they're a great amenity for the public, and I think we just need to be a little bit more responsible about how we maintain those and take care of them going forward. For reference, Douglas County has approximately 8,000 residents per public playground, and that's in the entire county, including Genoa and Lake Tahoe. Currently, with the 18 playgrounds we have, we are sitting around 3,000 and some change residents per playground. Even if we reduced this down to 13 total playgrounds, we would still be more than double the number of playgrounds that Douglas County has per capita. And I think that by selectively or making educated decisions on which playgrounds necessarily aren't the most important or aren't getting utilized the way that some other ones are, we can potentially take better care of and make the other playgrounds safer by designating which ones are the most used, the most appreciated, utilized by the public, and that sort of thing. So the first map that you've got there was was a collective kind of grading system amongst park staff. I'm a recent certified playground safety inspector. We also have another CPSI on staff, as well as Dave and Dan Castens. The four of us have had numerous meetings to discuss this and look at which playgrounds we felt were in the best condition currently, which ones we see being utilized the most and are the most worthy of continuing to invest money into improvements and bringing them up to safety compliance. But then also marking the playgrounds that we're just not real sure about. Maybe we're at a turning point right now where we need to keep them in a safe condition at the time, but not necessarily invest massive amounts of money into them and let them kind of see out the end of their usable lifespan, which is somewhere around 20 years typically. Up to 25. And most of our playgrounds were put in a lot like other things with no long-term plan to reinvest back into them and make those necessary, sometimes expensive repairs to keep them up to safety standards. And as you can imagine, they could be a huge liability if they're let go beyond that, or also turn into a hazard for the community and also just unnecessary phone calls, which aren't our favorite. So we've got some identified here that we think are the best candidates to get rid of when the timing's right. If we can agree upon a plan to move forward with that. It was thought out as far as making improvements or replacement of playgrounds that are nearby, maybe within walking distance of some of those, the ones that are marked in red that we would like to see go away. Now, this isn't, a complete plan. It'll, I'm sure, always be a work in progress. It may evolve as new developments choose to build playgrounds. Moving forward, we're going in the direction that development would be responsible for maintaining that, or that at least there's a funding source in place from the development to help take care of that. But regardless, these 18 we are stuck with, if you want to call it that. And this is the situation where we're at, and we're trying to come up with the best way to move forward and keep these in working order and as safe as possible for our citizens and the kids in the community. So is there any questions? I don't know if you'd like me to go through the plan on the second page. We've kind of identified a 10-step plan there.
I have a question.
Okay.
Is it fair to really put Schultz Ranch in there since they are funded through the landscape maintenance district?
That's true, and that's the first one going forward, what I was talking about, where the neighborhood will contribute to the maintenance there. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say that they're contributing enough to replace that playground, and that's obviously a long time down the road. That's a fairly new playground.
I can tell you as a board member who sat in on those discussions, it was our intention that the money not only be sufficient enough to take care of everyday costs, but to go towards the future and to hopefully have enough money to fund it. Are you saying perhaps we should increase that district allowance or?
I would have to look at what the surplus is right now based on the contracted lawn maintenance. Now that we've incorporated the second park, park area, the detention basin, there'll also be a third. So it's for me, I would have to look more into it before saying yes, we should or no, we shouldn't. But that's.
Well, I can tell you when we were doing our discussions, there was uncertainty about how much the residents should be charged. Is 20 enough? Is 100 too much? What's going to be fair to the residents, yet still give us the money to maintain the park so that it's safe and pleasant for it to be used? So is that something
I think
maybe
that
we
might
need
be,
to
yet to be seen as we move forward and start to understand. We're also, similar to this long-term playground plan, we're trying to come up with long-term asphalt maintenance plan. It's very similar. It was just installed like crazy and with no real long-term plan of how to take care of it and maintain it properly.
So is this maybe something we need to pay a little more attention to in the future, these landscape maintenance districts and how they operate and how the mechanism by which they collect and how much they collect?
Definitely.
Are there any other questions? Commissioner Schutte?
You had mentioned if we'd like to hear the 10 steps.
Sure.
I would love to hear
Yes.
that.
Okay. So step number one, we have some budget funds right now for this fiscal year remaining in the playground that are designated for playground projects. Blackwell's Park, we've identified as an older structure that is getting very near needing updating, replacement, something along those lines, a major remodel, basically. But because of its geographical location to Riley Circle and Sunland Vista, which are kind of two of our top picks to get rid of. I don't think most people in this town probably know where Riley Circle is. It's a cul-de-sac and in the middle of a bunch of mobile homes, and I don't know that I've ever seen kids using it. But that's how we came up with Blackwell's being our first step, was to use some of the money that we already have designated and funded for playgrounds to get the design process started there. The thought being, if we get the design going at Blackwell's, then we can go in and take out Riley Circle, which is pretty close to there. Once we start construction on Blackwell's, which would be step 3, then it would be a lot easier to justify removing Sunland Vista, which is, Blackwell's is almost in between the two of them. At Blackwell's, we're envisioning a little bit more of a project with a little bit of turf reduction on that corner, maintenance-friendly landscaping, new concrete and a pavilion if needed. We haven't assessed the pavilion at this point, but there's a bunch of large junipers in the area also, just cleaning up that whole corner of the park and making it a lot nicer. There's a lot of kids in that neighborhood. That neighborhood's very densely populated. It's the only playground near there besides these two that really don't get used very often. So that kind of goes all work together for steps 1 through 4. Designing Blackwell's as the first step, which we already have some budget money for. And then also, I think that there would be enough money left in that $75,000 to potentially go in and demo Riley Circle out of that same money that we already have. So steps 1 and 2 could potentially already have the money in place for those. And then construction of Blackwell's and removal of Sunland Vista. On a lot of these removals, I've noted to replace the playground area with shaded picnic tables and low-maintenance landscape. So add a few plants, add on to existing drip system, DG, couple of single shaded picnic table shelters, and make it more maintenance friendly, but also leave something there for the public to enjoy and to be able to go there for a picnic lunch or something like that. Long Ranch is step number 5. Depending on the time frame of putting this plan in place, that could, require replacing the structure at that point, shrinking the footprint. Soft fall tile seems to be the direction we've moved so far with Schultz Ranch, Ross Gold, John Makins, and Ronald D. and Centennial. We have 5 now with the soft fall tile, which is much bigger upfront cost, but way less maintenance, and you're not replenishing that wood mulch on sometimes several times a year. Sunset Park is step number 6. That is the only structure we have that's for the age range 2 to 5. It's very old and outdated. I think with cleaning up Long Ranch and making Long Ranch a lot nicer ahead of that, Sunset is down behind the governor's mansion or very close to there. They're close enough in proximity that I think we could justify pulling that one after that. Pete Livermore Sports Complex. After a lot of discussion, we just can't get rid of the play structures at the sports complexes. They get used nonstop. Especially, I have kids in Little League. When one's playing, and that's what the other one's doing. So it would be really hard to get rid of those. All 3 of them at Centennial, Governors, and Pete Livermore get used constantly. And then number 8, Carriage Square. We would have a similar project to Long Ranch, shrink the footprint of the wood mulch that's there, replace that with softball tile surface. The playground's in pretty good shape right now. A couple years ago, we made some improvements there and replaced some different components of the structure. Monte Vista is very walking distance to Carriage Square. Again, I've never even seen kids on that structure. It gets watered by the current irrigation, which rots the wood mulch, and it's just doesn't make a whole lot of sense where it's at. Not a lot of people going there and visiting that one. And then finally, number 10, this summer we plan on working on a master plan for Mills Park, and so that's kind of yet to be determined how much we would be looking at spending there or how big of a playground, but we're envisioning that as kind of the centerpiece and, one of maybe our biggest, nicest playground at Mills Park at some point. And that's it. Does anybody have any questions?
I do.
Go ahead, Dave.
Okay, Nick, interesting plan. I just did some thumbnails, calculations, and it looks to me like if everything happened, could happen there, it looks like it's somewhere between $3 and $4 million spent. So my questions are, in general, I know you probably can't nail this down right now, but what is the thinking on a timeline in general? And where does all the money come from?
So we have received through CIP funding for playground projects like Ronald D. Wilson and John Mankins recently. We've gotten, maybe Dave can correct me, I might not have the numbers right. I think 3 years in a row we've gotten that funding.
Okay, yes, for the last 3 years, we have put in a request, like for CIP, like funding to do playground upgrades and like renovations. And so this is our 3rd year that we're in right now.
And I guess our thought, Dave, is by investing in selected playgrounds and reducing the total number, that we can get in a place where we're on a path of regular spending where hopefully we could get that money budgeted annually, X amount of dollars, but we have to spread it out. And I would see, just a guess, I mean, I can't imagine all of this happening in less than 10 or 12 years.
Okay. Yeah, I can see the CIP money, and it looks like, maybe $170,000, but that's a far cry from 4 million. So, right?
Yes. I believe Dave was this year 300?
Nick, are you referring to what we got this year for CIP
Yeah.
for playground?
Yeah.
This year was 75. The previous 2 years was like 300.
So we had some rollover from there. So Dave, there was 2 years of 300,000, 2 years in a row, and then 75,000 this year.
Jen, did you
Oh,
want to make
okay.
a comment?
So there's more than what shows on there.
So some additional clarification on some of the funding. For example, Roscold Park, that was partially grant funded from a Land and Water Conservation Fund grant and then residential construction tax that funded that entire project, which was, I think, almost $600,000. But in the end, it had no general fund money and no capital improvement money associated with that project. As Chair or Leanne Kiever mentioned before, the Landscape Maintenance District and then the residential construction tax credits funded the Schultz Ranch Park project. There's a lot of different funding sources that we have kind of in our opportunities to be able to fund some of these projects. We do have a pretty significant residential construction tax balance right now. So if we want to do an entirely new playground or new surfacing, we can use that funding source, which is what's funding Ronald D. Wilson and John Mankins Park upgrades right now, in addition to the CIP funding. Also, Land and Water Conservation Funds is it's a one-to-one match, but it's a great way to leverage what funding we do have. And they really support accessible playgrounds. And that's our goal moving forward, is at least 50% of every playground will be fully accessible for all abilities and all needs.
Does that answer your question, Dave?
Yeah, just a comment. I
Sure.
want to make sure that I'm not misinterpreted here. I'm for this. I'm certainly not opposed. I just know that that's a lot of money and wonder where it's all going to come from. So I hope we can find it somewhere.
Anybody else have any comments? Commissioner Wilkie?
Favorite mic.
There.
Thank you. So what exactly are the maintenance costs like for Sunland Vista? What are we going to save by getting rid of that park?
Well, when one component of that structure fails, say a new tube slide can cost several $1,000s and more, and that's just one component. Now you have staff time to go change that with a piece of equipment that can take several days. You have to do a safety audit after that, which those are very extensive and take half a day at minimum to complete in the field, and then probably another half a day to write up the report, which safety audits are done after major repairs or alterations to the structure. Or any kind of failure. Now, what happened at the second playground at Mills Park, for example, we had so many components fail there and been removed, and they had been boarded up. And this is before we had multiple playground safety inspectors on staff, or we've had a couple in the past, and they've moved on, different employment, but we ended up just removing the whole structure because it gets to a point where, okay, it's going to cost us $25,000 to fix that. The engineered wood mulch, you're looking at around $5,000 a year worth of wood mulch to replenish at each playground. And then that's on top of staff delivering it there and spreading it. Our employees also spend time raking the bark out. It gets displaced underneath swings and at the bottoms of slides. That's why we've been going more towards the softball tiles. It would vary from each location depending on how old it is. The older it is, the closer it is to that 20, 25-year mark, the more often you're going to start losing major components. Once staff notices a crack in the bottom of the slide, we have to remove it. And we can't leave that there once we've acknowledged that it's there, obviously, because then...
Right, it's a safety issue.
Yeah.
I understand. It's funny that you say that you haven't seen anybody there, because as soon as you opened it up after COVID, I've been there, I go there 3 times probably a week because I have my grandson now, and it's always, there's a lot of people there.
That's Sunland Vista?
It's Sunland Vista. And then if you're doing the stuff at Blackwell's, are you going to include a 2 to 5? Because that's kind of, a lot of those components at Sunland Vista are younger age than the stuff that's at Blackwell's right now.
Like I said, this isn't, we assume that this is an evolving plan always. I knew that the playground at Sunset Park is a 2 to 5 playground. And we planned on replacing the play structures at the sports complexes as we do those with one of each. There's currently 2 structures at Pete Livermore, so our thought was put in one 5 to 12 structure and a 2 to 5 structure. I don't think that we're set in stone in any of these. If there was, in Blackwell's, I think Mills would definitely warrant multiple structures of varying age ranges. Maybe Blackwell's does also, and I'm sure that there's more people going to the playgrounds than we see from 7 to 3:30 on a normal day. But you definitely get a feel. I
Right.
guess we get an impression of
Right.
how many
and
we
I
think are
understand
going
that.
there, but that may not be reality also.
Right, and I understand that. It's a really dense neighborhood, and economically level, if you look at the parks that you've picked, some of them are in lower economic areas than others, and so I kind of worry about that too. And I don't know if you looked into that when you were looking at the parks to get rid of the level and the densities.
A little bit. I can tell you that what would make the most sense is a park over beyond Riley Circle, somewhere in the neighborhood between Lampa and Airport. But to buy property to build a park over there is probably not likely.
Probably
That's
not.
where we should have a playground, but we don't.
Right.
And no, we'll take that into consideration at Sunland Vista, though, and
And then if you do, and maybe, and I know this is down the road, but maybe if you do get rid of the stuff at Sunland Vista and you're looking at long-term, make it maybe something that middle schoolers can use, something that keeps them off the streets or whatever, I don't know if it's a skate, I know it's not, couldn't be a skate park because it's too small, but something in that age range, just because of the density and the population in that area too, so. I hate getting rid of parks and playgrounds. This is a toughie for me.
Anybody else on the commission have any comments?
Yeah, I just, thank you for going through that, because I think talking about it does bring up conversation and discussion, which it's really important. And because, yes, it is so difficult to get rid of a park. To that, though, I also appreciate how there's a plan B for those areas that perhaps the playground equipment is being removed, but other amenities will be added, whether it's picnic tables or, maybe even a park or, something small. But anyway, just to acknowledge that those pieces of land can still be a park, just with different kinds of amenities. So, thank you.
Dave and I actually had that discussion today and trying to come up with other things. This is somewhat repetitive of just installing some shaded tables in low maintenance landscape. And, we were discussing, is it, exercise equipment? Like there's a piece at Ross Gold now, and there's some older kind of dated stuff at Mills Park. But if that didn't require, the soft fall, would that be less maintenance than the playground? Or just kind of scratching our heads at what the other possibilities are to replace that playground with something that's an equal draw for the community or benefit to the community to come to that park for that reason, but maybe a little bit less maintenance on staff and not quite as expensive to invest in continually.
Any other comments? I have a couple comments. So Sunset Park is right down the street from me, and I can tell you that my kids love that for, they grew up there and they're 20 and they're gone away. And it's used a lot. It is used a lot. And there are strollers coming down past my house on a daily basis, especially because the sun is shining and so forth. And that, I think it would be a mistake to take that park out. I think that we need to find the money to replace that park with something similar and keep those people coming to the park, because that's truly what goes on there. So people drive there for the little kids because it's kind of tucked in, and I think they feel safe, and they push their strollers over there with their little kids. I mean, my neighbors just were bringing their grandkids down there on Sunday, so, you know, on Easter, and saying, hey, we're going to the park. So it's a very popular park for the little people. And if the bigger kids are there, they go over and play in the grass. It's a great setup, in my opinion, the way it is right now. And I think it'd be a mistake to take that play structure out. I think we should find money to replace it. So those are my 2 cents on that.
I have a feeling that we would probably get that feedback on every single playground on here, with maybe the exception of Riley Circle.
Okay. Well, I can tell you from a
I think that there's people going to every
Yeah,
single playground, whether we see them or not. And if we can offer a better playground 6 blocks away, I think that that's the
I'm
decision
just
that
saying
needs to be made.
that the way that it is structured and the way that they put those little kid things there, it works really well. And people come when they drive there, and they also push the strollers there all the time on a daily basis when it's nice weather out there. So just something to be considered. The other question I had is, as far as funding for the T-ball fields and the structure there, was that built with 18, and can we use maintenance from 18, question 18, to maintain that park, that facility? Because I know that was one of our first projects, was question 18, were the T-ball fields at Governor's Field.
I'd have to check. I don't know offhand, but we can check into that.
Okay, so that's another funding source for that red one at the T-ball fields. And that's it. So does anybody else have any questions, or any members of the public out there that would like to speak on this issue that I can't see? It's weird asking this question. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your presentation, Nick and Dave.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So it looks like you're staying in the seat, and you're going to discuss about the Fuji Park master plan. So Nick and Jennifer are going to talk about that. So go ahead, Nick.
I think I'm mostly on my own again. Well, we've been working on Fuji Park Master Plan for quite a while now. What the design that you received is the result of several surveys that were sent to the general public, and also to a very extensive list of every user that has rented different amenities at the park in the last 3 to 4 years. I sat down and met with, mostly virtually, the CTA and Cooperative Extension. You heard from Lisa at the beginning of the meeting. Also shared the initial concepts that came before this with all those groups, and sent them to all the neighbors, Douglas County, Stewart Indian Colony, amongst others. It was a long list. Compiled all of their feedback and questions and concerns, and used that from the first 2 designs to come up with this single design. The park, our vision at Fuji is to remain a community focal point for large events, whether they're inside or outside. The car shows and dog shows that go on there are a huge success. I think that's a great place for them, as much as some of the equestrian events have dwindled in the last few years from what they used to be. 4-H still is a huge part of what goes on at Fuji, and that's why we communicated with them through every step of this process. Bailey Pond, as you guys know, is a great asset and gets used on a daily basis. So we didn't want to detract from any of that, but make the total park more user-friendly for those groups and for them coming in and also, keeping our staff's maintenance in mind. So what you've got on the design, some of the top comments we got through the surveys were in relation to the dog park and adding grass there. That was, I think that there were 80 plus written in comments on the public survey about adding grass to the dog park and redoing it, making it nicer, getting rid of the dirt. That's what we've done here, as well as the west end of the parking lot that we would like to set up for large events with power and water around the perimeter. Set that up so that maybe we can have some of those car shows out there in the parking lot and stop parking them all on the grass. I don't think we're going to get away from events on the grass, obviously with the dog shows and stuff, but maybe limit that a little bit. A large pavilion where the existing playground is now. Also, we saved a space for the playground there because we're on the fence with that one pertaining to the playground plan that we just discussed. A large stage in the lawn that was somewhat designed to be about the same size as Wingfield Park in Reno, whether that's for live music or whether that's also used in conjunction with or during a dog show or the fair or anything like that. You could conduct auctions from that stage or make announcements for your large event, hand out the trophies at the end of a car show or dog show, whatever the case may be. There are some elements in here that were parts of the different conceptual master plans that had come through in the early 2000s, well, between 2000 and 2010. The driveway onto 395 along with the LED sign. Also, the interpretive trail in the past was got huge response that seems to be a public favorite to develop that at some point. And again, through the surveys, that was listed as an option for a potential improvement, and people loved it and were very responsive to that. The driveway over to the pond area is would definitely be a priority. Muddy conditions over there are one of the main reasons we shut the pond down now and limit that. I think that there's great potential for additional endow grants to help, whether it's that driveway or the continuing the sidewalk around the pond, also some landscaping improvements over there, try to buffer it from Carson Street so that it doesn't feel like you're standing on the side of the highway fishing. So there aren't huge changes. I think the dog park shifting into the lawn and the west end parking lot are probably, the biggest visual changes to this. Expanding the arena would open the door to a more diverse crowd of renters, whether those are motorized events. We want to make the arena more accessible, more marketable to outside groups, bringing them into Carson City, obviously, the old saying, heads in beds, getting them here for those big events. That one would be pretty simple to remove the permanent pens that are in place now and shift those to the outside of the arena walls. We could still have some permanent pens in place. The real problem there would just be moving the announcer's booth, which isn't much of a problem. And that's the quick version. I don't know if anybody has any questions.
Commissioner Keever.
Thanks for the presentation, that was great. I've got a couple questions and observations. If I can get the microphone on. I noticed during the fair, the halls where the livestock is exhibited is quite hot and it needs fans. Has something like that been considered going forward?
That was actually Cooperative Extension's number one request.
Okay.
Their two top comments were, we plan on demolishing the existing storage shed at the west end. It's a nightmare. It was the top priority in 2006 it should have been red tagged years ago. So they were looking for a replacement storage building for that, and then also a cooling system in the large horse barn. We've had numerous conversations with them on that, and it seems like they are eager to do some fundraising towards both of those and find a solution. With the large horse barn, to invest, I guess our perception of it so far would be to invest, in excess of $50,000-$60,000 into a permanent building system to see it get used 7 to 10 days a year might not be the wisest use of budget money if we can spend that amount of money on something like the exhibit hall that is getting used 6 days a week.
Okay, is there any other opportunities we might have to rent out the horse barn for some other activities? Or is it just strictly during the fair and for horses?
I know that it's been used in the past when there's been wildfires and it's been an evacuation point, and I know that livestock comes there to as a evacuation point.
Well, maybe
is
we
held
don't
there.
even need to put in a cooling system as much as bigger windows or something, so that there's more airflow. Just, there's got to be a cost-effective
I believe
solution.
the final cost estimate will include what a ventilation system in the barn would entail. And I know that for the last large event out there, Park supplied a large portable swamp cooler that was used, and I made that recommendation to Cooperative Extension and 4-H is that maybe, for the limited amount of time that is in need, you've got, say, 3 months out of the year where we're in those mid-90s and hotter, and out of those 3 months, if we have 10 days that people are actually using the barn or livestock is stored there to where we need to cool it, maybe it's a more fiscally responsible decision to get another portable unit of their own and we can store in the barn and utilize that to cool it, just because it seems like such a small amount of time that the actual system would be utilized.
Well, thank you for thinking it all the way through. I appreciate that. And just to comment, I have been going out to the dog park every evening since Sonoma is closed. And the number one comment people have is, God, if we just had grass. But I will also say that since we've been going out there, I have noticed Fuji is heavily used, and especially the playground is just almost wall-to-wall children. So I think we need to keep some sort of playground element in whatever we do, just because people come down from the lake to use that playground and that park, which I find fascinating.
I think that there's a lot of playgrounds in parks in Carson City that the majority of the population isn't aware of. And I think that humans are creatures of habit and we get stuck in our ways of I go to this park and my dog does this and my kids go down that slide and we do this. And I understand that people like that comfort level, or they are like returning to the same place. But I think that we need to find a way to get the community to maybe visit more of the parks, whether that's in some sort of incentive or, there's a program throughout the summer where they can punch a card to say that they've visited all 18 of our playgrounds or something. It might help.
That's a good idea. Because I'm nosy, curious, take your choice. I was over chatting with some of the people, and a lot of people who are using the park, it seems that the other parent or family members are at Costco and they're over using the park while the shopping is done. So I don't know if that weighs into anything, but I found it fascinating that we'll go to Costco and get the giant sized tub of coleslaw and then we'll go over to the park. Yeah.
Jen, did you have something to offer?
Yes, thank you. Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. I did want to acknowledge Lisa Taylor's comments at the beginning of the meeting. I do want to apologize for that, that she wasn't aware of potential, opportunities to improve the exhibit hall upstairs, to support their efforts. So Public Works has been talking with us for months about potential other alternatives for office space, for their function. The city currently provides office space for them at the Northgate building. And there is a potential, not, the board hasn't taken any action on it yet, but that the city might sell that down the road due to its age and the significant amount of improvements needed to just properly maintain that building, and the cost associated with it. So Public Works got with us and we sort of brainstormed potential options and looked into that as a potential way to use that upstairs space that's really not utilized at all. We do have some storage up there, but it's difficult to get up there. It has really steep stairs, and has some logistical challenges, but we thought that might be a better way to maximize the exhibit hall is by doing improvements. Obviously, if that doesn't meet their needs, we wouldn't pursue that at all, but it's just a potential alternative that might work for them. So we'll definitely follow up with Cooperative Extension after this and make sure they're on board with that, or if they're not, that's fine as well. I do also want to mention that the Redevelopment Advisory Citizens Committee, RAC, has allocated $200,000 and gone to the board for their budget toward Fuji Park improvements. So whatever master plan is approved eventually by the Board of Supervisors, they've already allocated $200,000 toward us starting that effort. And then we did submit in our capital improvement plan request in the second round of that, a request for another $100,000 for Fuji Park improvements as well. So potentially for the next fiscal year, we could have $300,000 ready to go once this plan is approved for whatever is identified as a priority. So I just want you to know that we're looking at that, and then maybe we could even write a grant or something and try to leverage what funding we have. So we try to be as creative as we can in leveraging the funding that we have, but I just wanted you to be aware of those potential immediate funding sources.
Thank you, Jennifer. Commissioner Caldwell?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to the dog park. I was active in the, what is it, Paws for Parks? Or Parks for Paws, I forget. Anyway, we were very involved in getting the fencing and getting that area, but we're really disappointed we couldn't get grass. And part of the reason was, I guess, there was no way to keep it up. But if you're proposing to put grass in there now, then I presume we're talking about maintaining it and keeping it up so that everybody can enjoy it the way it was before we couldn't have grass.
So we've talked about different ways to design a dog park that would be maintenance friendly and also, obviously benefit the users that are going there. By shifting it into the lawn here, you can see the smaller section of the two. So you've got a small dog section, which essentially is within the existing turf, and a larger dog section that would be added. We would want to create 10 to 20 foot area around the perimeter of DG with trees and benches, so that your turf's only in the middle. So it gives people a place they can walk around the perimeter if they like. They can just sit and watch the dogs play in the middle. You're also not mowing up against the fences. By having two separate sections, and also by having another turfed dog park, we can do what we're doing at Sonoma Park right now and stagger those closures, so it gives us 3 to 4 weeks out of the season to go in and reseed, try and rejuvenate the lawn, get some new seed growing before it gets trampled again. And if we had multiple options, that would obviously be a lot easier pill to swallow, I guess, for the park users if they had another turfed dog park to go to during that time. This really wouldn't add any grass. I did some rough calculations. If this entire plan for the west end and the existing turf were to come into play, we're looking at removing some lawn where the stage area is, and then also where the pavilion is, where the new pavilion would be. And by shrinking that area and having the DG perimeter around the outside, the blocks that you're looking at in the design are 100% pure turf. So like I said, if we were to do all of that, we really wouldn't have much of an increase of turf, if any.
Okay. The other thing was, back to something you said about people going to Costco and leaving their dog to play. We had talked about that many moons ago, trying to find a way to have people almost pay to put their dog in there as kind of a babysitting operation while they go. It never went anywhere, of course, but there may be some way of doing that, because it's better, of course, if the owners stay with their dog while they're playing.
I think that could be a liability potentially
Yes,
if you had an
yeah.
unruly dog that was
Yeah,
aggressive
well,
or creating issues.
And that may be what made the idea die, I don't recall, but it seems to me there might be some way of doing something along those lines, because people are coming down from California to, Tahoe and everything, and want to do something with their dogs, so. Or their kids too, that's an idea. Okay, I'm done.
Anybody else?
I just have a quick question, back to wildfire and the areas when livestock are housed during a wildfire. Does the park get reimbursed for the use of the stalls? And it just made me think about the article in the paper today, with wildfire and reimbursement. And I wonder if it's definitely not a funding source you want, and we don't want to ever have to use it for that, but
Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director, that isn't something that we've pursued. I hate to kick someone while they're down and try to charge them for their animals, but if there's that
No.
federal funding or the state funding that could be available for that use, we could look into that.
Right, it
We've
wouldn't-
also had inmates here too when we've had natural disasters. So when we had the floods, we actually had inmates and NDF crews housed at Fuji Hall and at the community center. So we've provided those facilities for additional emergency support, but we haven't tried to recoup that. I know the fire department has tried to recoup for the cost of paying for the NDF crews and some of those personnel costs, but we could look into that if that funding is available, should that happen.
right, and I wasn't implying that you charge the animal owners, but having worked on fire crew years ago, and so everything is, equipment that is reimbursed is charged to a particular fire, and I just didn't know if that was something that was done.
Does anybody else on the commission have any? Commissioner Keever?
Just a quick observation. I know a lot of regulars who go to Sonoma are now going out to the Dayton Valley Dog Park and to the dog park on Stephanie because they have grass. So I'm thinking if we do have grass, then if one park was closed, the regulars could go to the other park and vice versa. And I think you'd make a lot of people happy with even a strip of grass down the middle.
So there's the new development, Lampa Ranch East near the Humane Society now will include a dog park directly across from the corporate yard. And then we've also tossed around some ideas for some other areas, potentially in Long Ranch or I'm not.
Now, the dog park at Lampa, we're going to have access so that the volunteers from the animal shelter can take the dogs over and exercise, correct?
Well, it'll be a public.
Yeah. But we were thinking make it easier access for them if there was some
Mhm.
gate on is it Airport Road, I think?
There's been a conceptual design or two, but it hasn't reached that point of design yet.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other comments on this? Okay, I had a couple of quick questions. When we built that arena, I remember something about having an agreement with Bodine's. Is that just for parking, or is there any financial with
So
that?
they contributed funds towards the parking lot. I would have to double check to see if that was designated in any other way, but yes, they did contribute a large amount of money and to allow them to be able to utilize a portion of that parking lot. And if we were to change anything within the parking lot as far as entrances, I know that could potentially conflict, but improvements to the arena or grandstands are not a problem with that agreement, from what I've read.
Okay, thank you. And with the funding that Jennifer said she got, it looks like you can tear down your storage shed.
I hope so. The
I
Honda
would
Hut, we call it.
I would suspect. So is there any comments from the public out there on this issue? The conceptual plan for Fuji Park? Okay, hearing none. We're going to move on to,
I have 2 callers on the line.
oh, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Sorry
very much.
about that.
We only have,
I moved
hold
too
on,
fast.
Mr. Chair. We only have public comment at the beginning and the end of the meeting. So if they
Oh,
have
not on an
additional
issue.
comment, yeah, we have to be really strict
Thank
on
you.
that. That's how the agenda is written.
Thank you very much.
Sorry about that,
That's
but,
okay.
and this isn't an action item as well, so.
Okay. Thank you very much. We're going to move on then to item number 7.
No, it is an action item, so are we gonna make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors for approval, or do you have additional direction to staff that you wanna bring back?
Okay. Does anybody
I
have
have
any
a
additional
question real
direction?
quick. So we have 2 people on the line that have comments about this, but they can't comment on this agenda item?
Yeah, so we had public comment at the beginning as it's listed
Right.
on the agenda. I mean, I think
Would-
Ben Johnson's on the line and if he wants to weigh in, but
Because usually with school board, they can't ask anything during public comment that's on the agenda. But if it's agenda, if they wanted to talk about Fuji Park because Fuji Park is on the agenda, they're not allowed, they have to do that during public comment in the Parks and Rec.
that's my understanding right now, just because during COVID, we try to get all the public comment at the beginning, which was item number 3, and then we
Right.
have public comment on 13,
Okay, so just for clarification, for any comment on any agenda item, they have to do it during public comment
during public comment, correct?
because of COVID.
Yeah. Ben, are you on the line?
Thank you.
Yes, sorry, Ben Johnson, Deputy District Attorney for the record. That's correct. Right now, unfortunately, public comment is limited still a little bit. I know that the Board of Supervisors and the rest of the city is really trying to get us back into having the public in the meetings again. But at this time, the way that it's agendized is that there's no public comment between items. If the chair wanted to, you could take public comment now, but then you would also have to take it after each of the other items that are agendized. But generally, yes, for now, we're only doing public comment at the beginning and the end, and the public is invited to talk about anything that may come before the board, the commission now or in the future.
Okay, so I think that if there are people that want to talk about this issue and it is an action item and we want to actually move forward on this, I think we should hear from those people because I suspect that they don't understand the rules as well as they should. So that's my concession. So is there anybody out there that would like to talk about this item?
Caller, when you hear the 2 beeps, it's your turn for public comment. State your name for the record. Caller, are you there? All right, we'll move on to the next caller. When you hear the 2 beeps, state your name for the record.
Anna Marie Thompson.
Welcome, Anna. Go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Anna Marie Thompson. As a lifelong member of this community, Fuji Park has been an important part of my life, both personally and as a 4-H member and leader. Over the past few months, 4-H members, leaders, and I have provided extensive input to the Fuji Park master plan process. We constantly use Fuji for youth 4-H activities. This park was made and has always been known to be the city's use for animal events. It's the main use for this park. Other parks, such as Mills Park, could be more for other entertainment uses. I think it's important to keep the heart of Fuji's use in its heart. My top 2 priorities for 4-H in this master plan are a replacement of an existing storage shed and overhead fans for the existing barn. The storage shed replacement has been included in the master plan. However, it is our understanding that extensive dirt work and at least a portion of a retaining wall next to a new west parking lot may take 5 to 10 years to construct. As we have been using the existing shed for over 20 years, we would prefer to continue using it until the city can complete their work on the parking lot. However, we are being told we must cease using the shed in near future and find temporary place for our store our equipment, possibly for a decade. Our initial research indicates that if we want to move forward with building a replacement shed now, it would likely double the cost of the project and the amount of our fundraising, if we have to also complete the dirt work and retaining wall. An additional concern that is if the shed is located like it is drawn in the report, the shed will be located right next to the driveway entrance to the parking lot, which may put youth and adults in the path of traffic when accessing our equipment. The second item, fans for the barn, has not been included in the plan at all. The existing barn is essentially unusable for 4-H and all other livestock events and activities, including rodeos, due to the poor airflow in the summer. The temperature regulation is so bad that it puts animals at risk of serious illness and death. If you have attended any 4-H livestock events, you've seen the tables with bunny cages under the trees out by the creek, and the kids leading their sheep and goats to shady areas because they can't stay in the barn while they wait for their events to be held. It's way too hot. We are excited and happy that the master plan includes benefits to grow the use of the arena. However, livestock and rodeo users will still veer away from this use if the barn they're storing their critters in is unsafe. We greatly appreciate the opportunities we have to use Fuji and other parks and recreation facilities. 4-H and Parks and Rec have had a productive relationship spanning more than 4 decades, benefiting both organizations and thousands of youth. 4-H is willing to work hard to raise these funds needed to complete both these projects. We want the master plan to move forward so we can move forward as well. We would appreciate the help of this committee to address our concerns so we can continue to use the wonderful resources in our community to support youth development. Our kids need your support to continue to grow and develop as 4-Hers and community members. Thank you so much for your time and your consideration.
Thank you very much. Jen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. I think we can add a note where it says existing horse barn, and then on the back of your plan, note that additional, temperature regulating improvements are needed. And we can work, with our partners to determine what that might be and could be grant funding. So that's easy to add that note. I'm going to let Nick talk about the site work and the existing structure that they're using for storage, because it is a potential hazard, and we recognize that. So we've put them on notice that we do need to get anything out of there, and we have to come up with a plan to remove that facility. Regardless, it's a potential safety issue. As far as a temporary storage or permanent storage, we don't want to put a permanent storage facility that doesn't go with whatever approved master plan is, because we don't want to have an additional headache. If there's temporary storage, we can definitely work through that. But as far as permanent storage locations, I think we need to all agree upon where that could potentially be. And if there's site work or things like that, we don't want to put it in a way that it wouldn't last or create drainage issues or cause other problems or erosion in the park. But temporary storage, we can work through that. Permanent facilities, I'm a little bit more concerned about if they were to make improvements. We want them to be in the right location.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Nick Wentworth, Parks Project Manager. Yeah, Jen summarized that well, is that making any sort of permanent improvement where the existing storage shed is just counterproductive in moving towards this master plan, which is, everyone or our long-term vision of how the park can best meet the needs of the community. And so to build something permanent where we know that it's not going to end up doesn't make a lot of sense. And the temporary solution, I think 5 to 10 years would be somewhat of a guess. It might even be worst case scenario. That is all dependent on finding the funding to make the parking lot at the west end happen. We did reach out also. I got a lot of feedback from several departments at Public Works, transportation, water, stormwater, and part of the reason that the item number 28, the cooperative extension storage building in the proposed location there is up against the roadway is currently there are additional parking spaces on the outside that are along Old Clear Creek. And the transportation engineer was interested in shifting the parking lot out to that same boundary and incorporating those same number of spaces down into the parking lot so that you reduce the safety risk of people backing out of those spaces into traffic. Gives you a bigger footprint for the parking lot. So there were a lot of factors taken into consideration in the design from several standpoints throughout city staff and other groups. I'm not real concerned with I guess with the comment on that facing potential driveway traffic. My intention was for this storage building there to be facing it'd be the dog park. So the door there would be facing into the parking lot and also locating it to where it was still a reasonable distance to the lawn for them to transport those materials that they keep in there for events to get them over to the lawn. The new location on the design is virtually the exact same distance to the turf from where it is now. And we just thought it would be easier in a paved area. You can access it with a vehicle. You can pull up and park next to it. You can load things into a vehicle, drive them out to the grass, whatever you needed to do. Back, I guess, to those parking spaces, by eliminating those, the existing dirt lot at the west end has a pretty significant grade change from Old Clear Creek Road down to the dog park. And that was only our initial guess, along with the stormwater engineer and some other public works staff, was that we could potentially end up with a retaining wall over there on that edge of the parking lot up against Old Clear Creek, and maybe there's a fence at the top of it or whatever that may look like. I think the hesitation in allowing cooperative extension at this point to move forward with that storage building construction this summer was just for the fact that it's a small piece of a much bigger puzzle over there in working out what could be the west end parking lot and having that graded appropriately for drainage, and that we're managing the runoff properly into detention basins to filter out the runoff from all that asphalt. There's a lot of factors into just throwing a structure in there, and then we find out, say 5-7 years from now, we finally have the money to start developing that parking lot, and we realize that structure is up 5 feet in the air from where the parking lot needs to be graded at. So I think doing the homework ahead of time of, having survey and site work done to establish, even if it was just a design, then we could answer with fact, well, the current grade is 3.5 feet above where the finished parking lot grade needs to be. So I think there's a lot of unknowns there, and it's difficult to plan that at this point without having some of those answers.
Thank you. Are there any other commission members that have any comments on this? Does anybody want to entertain a motion?
I move to recommend to the Board of Supervisors approval of the Fuji Park Master Plan update with the addition of the
A cooling system for the horse barn.
cooling system for the horse barn.
I'll second that.
All in favor of that motion? Any discussion on the motion? All in favor of that motion?
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
Aye.
Okay, was that since there's a delay here, was that an opposition or a approval? I believe that was Commissioner yeah, it was Cartwright.
Thought she said
It was approval.
Thank you very much. It was a little bit late, so we wanted to make sure. Thank you very much. Okay, so moving on, the next item is number 7, and this is discussion only regarding impacts in Parks and Recreation Services and associated revenue due to the COVID-19. And Mr. Dan Arp is going to present that to us. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you. For the record, Dan Arp, Recreation Superintendent. We were asked to provide just kind of a brief statement and have some discussion, just kind of see what this last year looked like for our department in relation to COVID-19. And while there's many impacts to our department, this is just going to focus on kind of the fiscal impact as much as we know so far. So like the rest of the country, we shut down on or around March 17th of last year. So we just finished a year since everything changed for our department. Fortunately, we weren't locked down for too long in our department. We were able to open up in some level or another by the beginning of June for most of our facilities. Although restricted, we could open up, like the aquatic facility and the MAC were able to open up the first week of June, which we were grateful for, but they were done on a limited basis where it had to be reservations only and for the drop in use, and really restricted the types of activities we've had there and the number of participants per activity, such as, basketball. Up until last week, basketball was still on the prohibited, contact basketball was still on the prohibited list for the state of Nevada, so we were only allowing 3 people on a court that can only shoot baskets, but we couldn't play. So things like that have been in effect since last June and actually are still in effect today, although now as of last week, it looks like we can start looking into changing the basketball portion of it. But everything else at the aquatic facility as well, we've only really been doing lap swimming. We haven't had any programs at the pool since we opened back up in June. So we've pretty much been running the same way for the past 9 months. So what you're providing in your packet is this is our normal report that we do annually anyway with our cost recovery report. We just kind of continue that through 2020. And then the last column, it shows 2021, but keep in mind that that's not complete. I think this was pulled in February. So, it's only a partial year. Our fiscal year starts July 1. I think a lot of people were expecting to see that we'd see huge impacts in 2020 because when we think of 2020, that's the year of COVID. That's when everything shut down. But by the time we closed in March, and we're a very seasonal department, the majority of our year had already elapsed, and then the busiest portion of our year, July and August, had already happened. So what you'll see is there obviously was an impact in 2020, but we had, even though we were, say, 75% of the way through the year, we were probably 90% or so through what we normally spend for the year. Most of the impacts, I would imagine, we'll see this year in 2021, which we put what numbers we have down for that, but it's incomplete because we are still in that year. And also included as well, provided from April, our reservations quarter, just to give you an idea of the number of events that we have throughout the year, which were all canceled. We pretty much went an entire year and still up to this point without having any of our special events that we've normally have, although things are starting to be able to pick back up, and we hope to continue those here shortly. And our summer is starting to look like, while modified, we'll return to somewhat of a regular level of normal as far as our events go. Modified events, but most of those events look like they're going to come back, assuming state regulations allow us to do so moving forward and nothing changes from where we currently are on our path. So just kind of looking at the spreadsheet, looking at 2020, I know there's probably a few questions I know that Jen had as well, just looking at it off the top. So I'll try and address those. And then obviously, if you have any questions that I miss, I'll try and hit those as well. But I know that the initial comment that like Jen had when she was looking at this was just thinking that while we see that there's a decrease in revenues, that the expenditures were still higher than she expected. And like I said, we probably already saw about 90% of those expenditures in 2020, just because of the nature of our industry, and most of those impacts we'll probably see, we think, this year's, because now the aquatic facility, for example, has run almost an entire season while it's been open on a very limited basis. We haven't done any swim lessons. So the only revenues we really can pull in for the whole 2021 is going to be just lap swim, which is just a small portion. Swim lessons is definitely, losing that is going to have a big impact on our budget. And then, but even with that said, in 2020, while the expenditures were $633,000, had it been a normal year, 2019, if you can't really use that as an example from the year before, because we were closed for a couple months due to maintenance at the facility. So, our expenditures for the aquatic facility would probably have normally been around $655,000. Plus, we added $15,000 to our budget due to minimum wages increase that we saw last year. And so, had things been a normal year, the normal expenditures would probably been closer to like $670,000. So we still did see a decrease in expenditures of probably about $37,000 or so if we were to try and project things out, having been normal. Youth program is about what we expected. The youth program was closed for a couple months, but then in summer we have actually been operating our before and after school program in our summer camp. We have had numbers reduced, so revenues are down because we haven't been able to accommodate as many kids in the program, but that has been running pretty consistently, which is good. But obviously we're seeing some decreases in our numbers. And even now that we could potentially have more children in that program, our numbers have been low, just because I think there's more parents working from home than traditionally, and so there's been less need for the childcare portion of that. Or just because of concerns of COVID as well, is probably, I'm assuming, would be a factor. And then the MAC, same thing, kind of standard decreases, what we would expect to see. It's been pretty slow. It's been busier there at times, but definitely slower than normal just because of the reductions that we've put on the participants of what they were allowed to do there. I know one of the big questions is sports. We have had 0 sports in the last year. Why is there any expenditures in sports for 2021 when we've only made $130? And to be honest, I don't even know where that $130 would have come from, because we've had 0 sports. And that's mostly just going to be salaries. And we still have our sports manager who runs the MAC, but his whole salary actually comes out of sports, not out of the MAC. And then 50% of my salary as well also comes out of sports. So that accounts for, I think, $111,000 of it. And there's been a few expenditures that we've made in the sports line item. But that would explain why there's been expenditures in sports with 0 revenue. And community center, here's the same thing. The biggest revenue source for the community center is the theater, which hasn't had any performances or events this year. And then we also have our contract classes, which are like our fitness classes. Those we were able to continue in the summertime on a limited basis. So that has been producing some revenue, but not as much as normal. And parks, as you would expect, would be basically 0 revenue. The only revenue that they generally generate is events and picnic pavilion rentals, which has been 0 for the past year. And the rifle range, which is a new funding source, so we don't really have comparisons for that this past year, is doing well, as would be expected as an outdoor venue, and it's been open. It was closed for a period of time, but it's also been able to be operational for much of the year that other places were seeing closures. So is there any questions on that spreadsheet?
It's not a question, but I just wanted to comment. This was really helpful to see. And, just how much Carson City does and Parks and Rec and the staff and the programs, and especially looking through the placeholders in 2020, and just so much goes on, and really what a hit this department took. And so thank you for all that you've been doing, and I know you have some great projects, the kayaks and all of that, and I mean, I'm just so amazed by all of that. So I just think this is, everyone in Carson City should really see what goes on in this city in terms of recreation and opportunities. It's a great place, so thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, seeing none, looks like, thank you, Dan. Seeing none, it looks like we can move forward on to number 8, and that's discussion and possible action regarding the recommendations of the Board of Supervisors regarding fiscal year budget 21-22 for Parks and Recreation. Jennifer Budge, Dave, and Dan Arthur can help out with that. So Jennifer, I'll give you the lead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. I want to just take a moment to kind of walk you through the exhibits that I provided, and that'll kind of tell the story of the budget process. The budget process has been going on for months now. As you know, we talked about the capital improvement needs of the department, which exceed $24 million that we know of right now as far as our asset management that we talked about at the last meeting. And thank you for all your help to help prioritize those needs as we move forward. So if you look at your first Exhibit A, this is a copy of what this board approved and recommended for approval at the last meeting. And I want to point out it continues, which is a good problem and something we're super excited about. There's a number 2, and Supervisor Schutte called me about this. What's this number 2? What are we doing here? Finance had notified us that there was additional funding opportunities, and we had to really quickly turn around some additional requests, which we were so excited to hear. That's a great problem to have, and we had, based on your feedback in our 5-year CIP plan, we knew exactly where we needed to go to kind of turn that around. And it was about a 24-hour turnaround. Dan and Dave and I all scrambled because you don't just submit a number, you have to submit paperwork and justification and really tell the story for the request that you have. So I do want to highlight on number 2, we were able to add additional requests for the board's consideration. So we asked for 2 additional courts. So that would be 4 courts total at Centennial Park to be redone. $100,000 of Governor's Field improvements, and we have those facility assessment reports. So if you're wondering what would the 100,000 be, we'd really look at that report. We'd work with YSA and we'd identify the priorities for Governor's Field. So that would be in addition to the funding that we identified for Field 3 improvements at Governor's Field. And then the MAC rear parking lot, we actually had this 2 budget years ago, and we have rolled over some funding and reallocating some prior leftover funds from the MAC building itself to kind of make that one happen. Adding the other outdoor pool to get replastered, which would be great, so we could do the top pool and the outdoor pool at the same time, which we would probably get better prices if we can do 2 pools at once, which would be great. That way we would have all 4 pools pretty recently replastered, which would be great because those really need to be done more frequently than what we've been doing. And then the $200,000 I talked about redevelopment previously has for Fuji Park improvements. We requested an additional $100,000 to try to leverage those funds. And then this past year, the redevelopment Citizens Advisory Committee also had allocated funding for us to hire a consultant to look at the theater and identify how we can make it more accessible for the general public and people of all abilities. So it would be taking that report that was just recently completed and trying to do some projects in that. So we identified $100,000 for that. And then also some maintenance requests for quality of life, because believe it or not, even though you'd think during COVID, the C tax and the sales tax would be going down, well, they're actually going up. So those sales tax projections had gone up, and then our request didn't really match how much was actually coming in. So another good problem. So we did do some adjustments. We went right off our equipment replacement plan that you saw at the last meeting and identified the top needs. So a Kubota tractor, a sports field utility vehicle tractor, Groundmaster 4000D, and a boom sprayer. So about $208,000 worth of equipment that we were able to add on to that request. So all of those items that you already reviewed and approved, in addition to this summary number 2, will be considered at the Board of Supervisors meeting April 15th when they review the tentative budget. So those of you that have been talking to user groups, I know a lot of the user groups reach out to all of you as park commissioners. When can I make public comment? When should I send in a letter? That is the meeting that would be most beneficial for you to send comments onto the Board of Supervisors. So whether it's a letter, an email, or a call into public comment at the beginning of that meeting, that would be the best suggestion for you to encourage citizens to comment on, so people know, the Board of Supervisors know what the citizens' priorities are. Before I move on, any questions on the capital items? Okay. Any concerns with that second request that we made? Okay, good.
Did you say 4 tennis courts instead of 2?
Yes. So the initial request that we made that the board approved was for 2 courts. Then we added another 2. They wanted to keep them separate in their requests, just to keep them straight. But yeah, so our goal would be to submit for 4 courts, and then I'll give you. I was going to talk about it during my director's report, but we are going to, if the board approves those 4 courts at their April 15th meeting, then it's likely that I'm going to go to the first meeting in May at the Board of Supervisors requesting to submit a Land and Water Conservation Fund grant for an additional 4 courts, so we could do all 8 courts at Centennial Park.
Great.
So the Land and Water Conservation Fund is a 1-to-1 match. So for every dollar that you request, you have to put in $1. So this would enable us to put in our 1-to-1 match to make the 8 courts happen. So I know that I've spoken to some of the tennis folks, and they're so excited about that potential, but we do try to leverage what funding we have when there's an opportunity. And the Land and Water Conservation Fund grants are due at the end of May. So we would just need approval for the board to apply.
Good.
So that's plan A. We have some plans B and C for Centennial as well, but we're hoping that will move forward. Okay, so if everyone's comfortable, we'll move over to Exhibit B. And this is the operation portion of our budget. So our services and supply budget. So as Dan mentioned earlier, where our salaries are, our services and supplies, so any equipment that we have funding for, this is our regular operating budget. This is, and Kurt will know, we consider supplemental requests for the board and for the budget. So these were the requests that the staff made. The deadline we're in between park commission meetings, so I'm just trying to kind of catch you up to where we're at in the budget process. So we've submitted requests for these items, and they went to the internal finance committee, which consists of the city manager, deputy city manager, a representative from the DA's office, human resources, the chief financial officer, and the deputy chief financial officer sit on that review committee. So Dan and I presented these items and a justification for each one to that board, along with every department has that opportunity as well. The Internal Finance Committee is recommending to the Board of Supervisors also for the April 15th meeting, all but number 7 of these items moving forward. There's one adjustment on we're requesting 2 new full-time staff for the park maintenance division. One would be an irrigation specialist, and we're requesting an additional park maintenance worker. So that would be a total of 10 park maintenance workers in our division. Right now we have 9. We really need additional help. With COVID, we have no inmates. We're down 20 full-time equivalents just by not having inmates. Even with inmates, we just desperately need some additional help in park maintenance. So that's where that request is. We are offering up some funding toward that cost from our seasonal budget. That's the numbers in red in parentheses you'll see there. So those would come from the overhead that we currently have to pay for a third party to hiring agency. We have budgeted about 52,000. Unfortunately, we just can't find seasonals at all. We cannot, no matter what we pay our seasonal staff, we just cannot keep our seasonal positions filled. We have much better luck with our full-time staff, which is why we're trying to kind of have a new strategy as far as park maintenance goes. So priority one was our legally mandated minimum wage increase that Dan mentioned earlier. That's through Nevada law. We are required every year to raise that until we can get to $12 an hour minimum wage. So that's the cost for that. And number two was a new irrigation specialist would be a new position in the department, reporting to the park operations manager. Then the park maintenance worker was number three. Number four is HIPAA compliant software for our youth program, so we can better track and be HIPAA compliant with how we store the information on our before and after school program participants and our Camp Carson participants. So any information about medical, also if someone had a restraining order, that private information, making sure we're storing that stuff compliantly. Number five would be contract services for our sports program. Scott Chapman's been doing a great job sort of revamping how we provide our sports program and contracting out those services. So not hiring as many staff or as many volunteers. That would be a 100% cost covering through program fees item, but we would be contracting out umpires and referees and things like that and have they would make sure that everybody is certified and trained, and it would take that responsibility off the city, which is great. And then number six is our equipment replacement program. Last year we requested $40,000, but only received $20,000 toward our equipment replacement plan that we presented to you guys at the last meeting. This would be an additional $20,000, so we can kind of stay on track with that. And then the number seven was a request from the Open Space Advisory Committee. Currently, we fund our park rangers, our two park rangers, 50-50 from the Open Space Fund and then 50% from General Fund. They wanted to see that for the senior park ranger as well, that 50-50 split. Right now, it's about a 71-29 split, but we haven't had the senior park ranger in that position for a year yet. So we're going to try to track and see where they spend their time and see if that really makes sense to split that way. And then the other item was from Open Space, so Kings Canyon Trailhead Grant Match. That's the Federal Lands Access Program grant that you've heard so much about. It does have a very small match. It's, multi-million-dollar project, and then that funding would come from the Open Space Fund, and there's adequate funding for that. Mm-hmm. So I know that's a lot to digest. Do you have any questions on our request for our operating budget? Do you think there's anything we missed? Are you guys comfortable with what we have on there? I know it's hard because we have these deadlines in between meetings, so I don't want you to think we don't take your requests seriously, and it's just kind of how the budget season falls. So as I said, as far as the schedule, and it's in your packet, that April 15th meeting will be the tentative budget that the board will consider, and they'll have a long discussion on the operating budgets for all city departments as well as capital. So that will be a really critical meeting. And then the second meeting in May is when they approve the final budget. But there's typically not a lot of discussion at that second budget approval meeting. It's really, in years past, it's been more formality. Mm-hmm. And then I did provide for you just a little history, actuals versus projected budgets, so you see how much each section of the department is budgeted, and then the different types of funds that we have. So the first page is all the general funds that we have. The second page are the quality of life fund, so question 18 funds, and that's 40% to open space, 40% to parks capital, and then 20% to park maintenance. And then we have an enterprise fund. So the cemetery fund is supposed to be cost covering, operate like a business, which it now is. I really want to point that out. I think that was, well, it's a sad thing to see that the revenue has gone up in the cemetery fund. That's always kind of heartbreaking. I am proud that we are cost covering and we're covering our business expenses there, because a few years ago, we were subsidizing from the general fund about $100,000 every year into that fund. So I think through our operational changes, changing the fee structure and making things just operate a little bit better, we've been able to make those improvements. So it is now cost covering. Then we have the landscape maintenance district. We only have one right now, Schultz Ranch. Residential construction tax, which is a tax on new home construction. And then there's a total overview at the bottom of that second page. Any question on anything in that packet?
No, that's good.
I don't see any questions or comments, so can we entertain a motion?
Okay, I move to recommend to the Board of Supervisors the proposals as discussed regarding the fiscal year 2021-22 Parks, Recreation, Open Space Department budget.
Thank you very much. Do I have a second on that?
Commissioner Wilkie, second.
Commissioner Wilkie? All in favor of that motion?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
I think we're late on the ayes there too, so moved. So we're going to move on to number 9, which is discussion regarding dog use policies in the park, and that is also for Jennifer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. We discussed this at the joint meeting in December with the Open Space Advisory Committee, and we're going to be discussing this again at our joint meeting in June. So I wanted to just give you an overview of what we talked about in December, and then just get your feedback on what direction you would like to take as a board. So we're kind of prepared for that joint meeting, and how we feel about rules, regulations, and policies related to dogs in our park system. So to kind of give you an overview of the general consensus and comments from the December meeting, these are the things that we heard from you and the Open Space Advisory Committee. That there's a need for improved and consistent signage in our parks and open space. We need to increase public education, including maps and videos once we have consensus on rules and regulations. We heard that a lot also from the staff. And I do want you to know that staff has already recognized that and started to make efforts on at least the public education component. I know Commissioner Keever's had some great suggestions, and our park rangers, for example, made a video about dog park etiquette. And we put it out on all of our social media, and then we can kind of release that and re-release that as we need to. But we're really trying to work about telling people how things work, what they can do, where they can go, not just telling them where they can't. So we try to be positive and turn that around, and our park rangers have been really great on that public outreach component. Also, several people were in support of dogs required on leash in parks except designated areas. So if that's the direction, we do need to decide, what does designated area mean? What are those areas? That could be dog parks, like Sonoma Dog Park, Fuji Dog Park. Obviously, you take your dog off a leash there. But other areas, or it could be other areas as appropriate. So it might be, people were very vocal at that meeting allowing dog use off on our trail system in our open space areas. That might be a designated area. So that's something we need to talk about if that's the direction. There were concerns for areas where there are sensitive lands, conflicts with wildlife and birds and dogs, and in wetland areas. Some areas may need to be closed during nesting seasons for birds, or require dogs on a leash just to reduce those conflicts. And areas, for example, might be Buzzy's Ranch, portions of the Carson River Trail where we have sensitive habitat and abundant wildlife, or where there's water quality concerns that we know exist. For example, the Waterfall Trail. We have that beautiful waterfall in the creek, and it goes through Quill, our water treatment plant. So we really need to make sure that we don't have, like the sheep can't graze through there when we have our annual sheep grazing program. We need to keep fecal matter, not to be gross, but out of the water quality system. So should dogs be allowed there? Maybe should they be on a leash and in that sensitive area? So just things to consider. Several people supported the idea of dogs on leash at trailheads, but allowing them off leash maybe a certain distance to be determined after the trailhead once they get going on the trail. This would be similar to what some of the federal agencies do, like the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management. It was acknowledged that there are often conflicts directly at the trailheads. There's a lot of people backing out. People are letting dogs out of their cars. They jet out maybe into the street. You know, they're just really excited to get out of the car, and that's often just an area of conflict. It's just the trailhead itself. There were concerns about taking away the off-leash experience away from the public and still wanting to provide a good mix of both on-leash and off-leash experiences, and I think the staff agrees with that too. Comments about sponsorship opportunities, like on the mutt mitt containers and the bag opportunities, could be a great way for businesses to advertise, but maybe they would fund those amenities to help keep our parks and open spaces clean. Comments that that dogs actually help manage some of the nuisance wildlife, such as geese. So perhaps allowing dogs on leash at Mills Park might help manage some of the geese population and then the feces associated with that population. There's still concerns about allowing dogs during large-scale special events, which is, I think, why that no dog policy at Mills is in place today. So, and then the last thing that I heard from both boards was the need to survey and gather feedback from the public regarding this issue. So what I'd like today is to talk about those items that we heard from you. If there's any clarifying comments or policies you think we need to consider adding, and I want to make sure that we're all comfortable before we move forward to that joint meeting. So that way open space can really speak on behalf of open space. This group can really speak on behalf of parks and recreation facilities, and then we can kind of meet together to try to have some consistent policies as we move forward.
So we'll open it up for discussion. Is there anybody up here that would like to talk about this? Commissioner Keefe.
Just had a comment regarding the advertising on the mutt mitts. If we decide to go forward with that, it seems like if we could tell potential sponsors, so many people a day use our parks, and this is a great revenue advertising mechanism for them, that might be beneficial. That would be the only thought I have. Otherwise, your comments sound like a complete, what do I want to say, an accurate representation of what we discussed at that meeting. I like the fact that it was a very involved meeting and that we had a lot of public comment from both boards. And I think going forward, we're taking a step in the right direction.
Yeah. I agree that all the policies that you listed are really what needs to be done. I guess what concerns me is how do we enforce it? You know, people, I don't know. What can I say? You all know what I'm thinking. And you're going to always find someone who won't wear a mask and won't keep their dog on a leash. I mean, it kind of goes together. So how are we just going to admonish people and then hope they take it? Or are we going to ignore it and hope someone else will do something about it? I mean, it's really going to be a problem. But I think we're on the right track by setting out the rules and then finding a way to make people comply.
And I think, thank you, Commissioner. Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. I think those are all valid concerns. We deal with them every day right now.
Sure.
Our park rangers are really wonderful, and my philosophy is always education over enforcement. So wherever possible, we're going to educate, and tell people, well, we can't have you go here because of this. You know, how about you go over here, and just give them a better suggestion and how we can do that. So that's sort of our philosophy, and the park rangers are really great. They very rarely write a citation. They are empowered to be able to write a misdemeanor citation if they have to, but it's pretty rare. I see that continuing, but if we can get better signage and better education so the signage is consistent throughout the park system, so people know what the rules are at those parks. Because right now, it's very confusing at a lot of the parks. A lot of them right now, we have these pet-friendly parks where you can't have dogs. Then we have other parks where you can't even have a dog at all. But it's not signed well. I think it's really confusing, especially for new people into Carson City that haven't been here
Right.
and just don't know. It's not very fair. So it's hard to write someone a citation when it's not properly signed and it's not, that story is just not told very well. So I think if we can improve some of that signage, education, hopefully the enforcement will still be minimal. But if there's safety issues or dogs that, pose hazards to people,
It's not the dogs.
Oh, I'm with you. Yeah. But I think we can improve on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I piggybacking on what both of you have said, I just think it's all about the public relations and the outreach and the education. Signage is a huge deal, and when people really know what they can do, and thank you so much, Jennifer, for saying that earlier, where you can go versus where you can't. I mean, it's just putting that positive approach, but then really the signage to really explain the areas that dogs can be off leash and that they can be on leash. I think that's wonderful. Perhaps brochures, even information at Nevada Humane Society. I think that could be really helpful. We have a wonderful partner potentially with NHS, reaching out to different community organizations. This really is, it benefits everybody. It's a quality of life issue. So many people care deeply about their dogs, and it's fun, and it's a great resource, these parks. And then I also appreciate sometimes the need for a citation, but if there's any way to have the interaction with the park rangers and the public to be positive, to where it's a helping contact versus punitive, that's always a plus, because folks appreciate that. I mean, if you anytime, even a police officer, if somebody is stopped, they're so grateful when it's a warning versus a citation, and it really does still get the message across. So I really appreciate what you said, and I agree.
So with that, do we feel like we're comfortable in going forward to the joint meeting with the Open
Yes.
Space Commission and telling them that was a great summary, Jennifer.
Do you have any additional direction on the designated areas where you think we should require or allow dogs off leash, other than dog parks?
I do.
Go ahead, Dave. Commissioner Whitefield.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I would add my voice to what Jennifer and the others have said about the enforcement issue. Just observation from being at Mills, there are, now that the weather's been better, we're there several times a week, obviously playing pickleball. And it's rare that I don't encounter someone who has a dog typically on a leash, and they simply don't know that, the signage is an issue. They don't know that dogs are not allowed there. And, I'm not enforcement. I just simply say, this is, you may not be aware, but dogs aren't allowed in this park, and you could be cited. I don't know that you would be. Depends on, where the rangers are. But I just try to let them know that could be an issue for them. And most of those encounters have been, very cordial. So I don't think that's a problem. And I guess I understand that, they're probably in Mills Park, the ability to have dogs in the wide open spaces where the events are held, that seems like a reasonable restriction. But I'm wondering over, on the other side, on the south side of the stream, if that might be a place where it would be possible to allow dogs on leash, because I I still maintain my previous comment about the goose problem. I would much prefer to have the, people picking up after their dogs than having to walk through the goose poop every day. So that might be something we could consider, as maybe just a portion of the park could be, could allow for dogs. So that's my comment.
Any
That's a
other
good one.
comments out there?
That's a good point.
So I guess my 2 cents in being a dog owner and so forth would be that on the trails, I mean, we never have our dog on a leash. We're prepared to put our dog on a leash, but that's just kind of the flavor of what we're doing out there. So and I believe that's true with a large majority of people that are out there that I encounter on the trail. So.
Thank you for the feedback.
So we feel like we're ready for our meeting with open space. So, yeah. Okay, so the next we have some staff updates. So a director's report, and Jennifer, that's you.
Thanks, you're probably sick of me already. I do want to congratulate Mike Freeman. He's been with the city for 5 years. He's our aquatics manager. He's great. I have a card for all of you to sign. Just thanking Mike for all of his efforts and help. And I'll keep bringing a card every time we have, city staff that have a milestone, so you guys can thank them for their service. So a legislative update. I've been monitoring a lot of bills. The city as a whole have been monitoring a lot of bills. I wanted to just make you aware of a few that we're monitoring right now. And then if you have any questions or feedback, it doesn't have to be today. If you want to even contact me outside the meeting, just to share your thoughts or concerns about that, feel free to do that. SB 140, this is regarding inmate wages. As you know, we've typically had 20 full-time equivalent inmates. In the past, we've had an agreement with the Department of Corrections, and we pay $1.50 an hour per inmate. So we have about $36,000 a year that we budget for that service. We haven't had any inmates, obviously, during COVID. We were hoping to get them back. But if this does pass at the legislature, it's likely that the city would no longer utilize inmate labor because the bill would require the inmates to get minimum wage. So it would likely no longer benefit the city to hire inmates or have the risk of hiring inmates as well, because we'd rather hire an average citizen that maybe has a driver's license and doesn't require one-on-one supervision and all the requirements that go with supervising inmates. So it's a significant financial increase, obviously, as well. I could see us, if this did happen, maybe we would hire inmates maybe once or twice a year for maybe a project-based effort. But we could always hire NDF crews or, other avenues that might actually be less expensive on a contract level.
Have you any idea of whether that bill will pass?
There's a lot of support for that bill.
Is there?
Yes.
Oh, too bad.
Yep. And I think the argument is the inmates are sending money home to help care for their families. I think there's also some provisions in that bill about restitution toward victims as well. So I definitely don't want, to have opinions on that piece in either way, but definitely about our inmate labor and what it would impact the city.
Yeah.
Then there's AB 85 about noxious weeds. It's about designation and targeting certain noxious weed populations, and then the power within the state to identify and categorize certain weeds as noxious. So maybe they can target populations, like if they said Russian olive or something like that one year, there could be maybe a targeted effort throughout the state. Then there's AB 99 about prevailing wage. This is proposing prevailing wage to increase from $100,000 to $250,000. The vice chair of that committee proposed an amendment for it to be lowered to $2,000. So that would be a significant increase for the city to do any park projects over those amounts. So typically when you have these larger construction projects, 100,000, prevailing wage has been up to 250 in the past, even right now it's 100. You pay a higher wage for those services. And there's also additional paperwork for the contractor, for the city. There's a lot of additional responsibilities with that. So it's not just paying a higher wage, but it's it's a significant impact to not just parks, but public works and any government-related construction jobs. Then there's AB 135, and that's provisions relating to animals, and this is specifically related to service animals and enforcement. This is one we're really watching because we do have issues and concerns with service animals, and in state law, you can only ask specific questions about service animals, and if they're posing a risk, it's really difficult to enforce or even cite if there is a dangerous situation. So this bill would add clarifications and enable better clarification, ultimately enforcing within our parks and open space. So we're really watching that one and commenting on it as well. AB 275 is about restricted use pesticides, and this would classify neonicotinoids as restricted use chemicals. As a Bee City USA and a Tree City USA, we support this bill. There were concerns that glyphosate, Roundup, was a neonicotinoid. It's not in that classification, so it really wouldn't impact Roundup use, but it would impact other restricted use chemicals. And our department doesn't currently use any restricted use chemicals, and neither does Public Works. And then AB 280 is about public restroom signage and gender equality. And then the federal level, we had the lands bill that we submitted, several years back. Didn't get out of committee in the previous congressional session. We're working with Senator Rosen's office to get that reintroduced, hopefully this session. So I'm hoping that happens. That has some technical corrections from the previous lands bill where the city acquired a lot of land through Oplima and the feds. So hopefully we can get some of the things that weren't 100% on corrected through that lands bill. And I'll keep you updated on that as well. And then I talked about the grants too, and the Land and Water Conservation Fund grant deadline is the end of May. We're hoping to, if the board approves what would be the match for the capital, we would go forward with a request for Centennial Courts. We could also consider a grant request for additional work at Governor's Field as well. If we had all of that funding, we might as well try to leverage it with a grant opportunity. And Fields and a lot of the work that we have identified at Governor's Field is eligible for Land and Water Conservation Funds. So we'll try to, over the next few weeks, kind of clean that up into a potential proposal for the board to consider. Vacant positions too, I forgot. We are in the process of filling our 2 vacant park maintenance worker positions. We have a new senior natural resource specialist, Georgia Vasey. She starts at the end of May. And so she's taking Lindsay Boyer's old position as she was promoted to the open space manager. And we still have the recreation coordinator at the community center vacant. And then we are hiring for seasonals. So any parents out there listening, get your kids to work. This is a great place to work in the summer. We've got sports, aquatics, youth programs, park maintenance, you name it. We have opportunities for everybody. So it's a great way, even if you don't want to work full-time, if you want to just work part-time, we can work with your schedule and find you a place to work. So apply. And that's all I have.
Any questions for Jennifer? Okay, so we're going to move on to number 11, member announcements. Does anybody have on the commission have any announcements they'd like to make for the commission?
I do.
Go ahead, Dave. Commissioner Whitehill.
Okay, thank you. No commission meeting would be complete without a report on pickleball. So I know you've all been waiting for this. I'm really excited to see that the tennis players are getting some attention and that those courts are going, their court replacements are going forward. I think that's a great thing for the community. You all know that we've had the project at Mills Park with the refurbishment and conversion of the 2 existing tennis courts into pickleball. I want to emphasize that was conceived as a demonstration project to basically show the level of support in the community and what the future needs for that type of facility might be. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about what's been happening down there to I think it's demonstrated that this is truly something that the community has embraced and is supporting. We continue to do fundraising. In the past month, we've raised additional funds well over $1,000, and we continue to do that because we're trying to maintain the courts. We've had some damage over the winter. Some of the cracks that we repaired last year have recurred, and we're going to have to fix those up. I'm ordering equipment and supplies to do that. We're going to try to get those repairs completed before the camp event that we have on Mother's Day weekend in May, 7th through 9th. I mentioned this before. We're going to have 4 pros from Pennsylvania and 32 campers. So this will be 5 hours a day on 7th, 8th, and 9th of May. And if you'd like to see some really good pickleball players instructing us neophytes, that would be a good time to come down and watch that event. That is generating $1,800 in revenue for the general fund for the court rentals for those 3 days. I wish we could get some of that money, but that's another story. One of the other things that we're doing, WANA put up some notices on social media over the past week. We're trying to get some, there's been a lot of requests for people that don't know how to play, that want to learn to play. And with COVID, we haven't been able to give our classes. So starting on May 15th, a Saturday morning, 8 to 10 in the morning, we're offering free introduction to pickleball classes. And in just a few days that we've had that up on social media, we've had 35 people sign up for those classes. A typical day, good day, we've had a lot of good weather this winter, which is fortunate. And people have been out playing in weather as cold as 32, 34 degrees. Now that it's really warming up, we're seeing a lot more people. It's not unusual to have between 30 and 40 people out there in the morning between, say, 9 and noon playing pickleball. So it's really been well received. A lot of people are willing to chip in and have donated money and offered to donate their time to help us with the repairs. So that's a really neat thing. Our Facebook page on Mills Park Pickleball is up to 85 members now. My email list on Carson Pickleball is up to 120. And in the whole area, I have over 300 people on my email list playing pickleball. So I'm trying to mention these things to let you know that the community is really supporting this activity and wanting to expand it. So I'm very excited about the opportunity for the Mills Park master plan revision, and hoping that we can, with the project that we've done and the demonstration here, that we have support in the master plan for building a real pickleball complex that, in my view, would bring a lot of added tourism to Carson City. We're talking beds and heads again, and this sport is growing so fast and is so popular all over the country that I know if we had a proper facility, we would be generating a lot of revenue for the community and have a lot of benefit to the community. There's a huge demand for this type of facility. So that's my pitch for today, and sorry for taking up so much time, but I think this is an important thing that's happening, and people need to know about it. So there you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Whitefield, for your report, and no sorries necessary. So anybody else have anything they want to talk about? Okay, so is there anybody out there from the Parks and Recreation Foundation? Okay, so the next would be update from the Carson City School Board Liaison. Stacy Wilkie, that's you. Commissioner Wilkie.
Thank you. Just an update. March 23rd, we started having 4 days a week for pre-K through 8th grade. And it's going well. Everybody's excited to see their friends, and we haven't had any outbreaks, so we're pretty happy. And and we're going into shortened sports seasons now. We had our winter sport early with the only one that we had there was skiing. Fall sports ends this week with football and volleyball. What is it? Oh, cross country and football were the big ones. We weren't allowed to have wrestling and basketball this year because of COVID restrictions. But then next week starts our spring sports, and so we have baseball, boys golf, softball, swimming and diving, and track and field. So it's feels a little bit more normalcy now, a little bit with the schools. Everybody's doing real well. Our nurses have taken on a big chunk by having to do COVID testing for our athletes, and we're thankful for the way that they've handled all that and all the extra responsibility, and we're thankful. Just to remind everybody, though, that at the sports there is a threshold for visitors or for spectators, so you should check with the athletic department to see if you can go. We had like a restriction of 250 fans at the football game, so that's something to be aware of. And the high school is still on a hybrid. It will continue to be on a hybrid till the end of the year. And then we've also got Pioneer High, which is our other high school that we have here that people don't know a whole lot about, but they're starting a whole online school along with their in-school high school, so that you can go K through 12 through the whole Carson Online. Carson Online is now Pioneer Academy. So it gives a lot more availability to those, especially those students who still want to stay remote when we go hopefully full-time in the fall. So we now have that option. So, and that's my update.
Any questions?
Yes, I'm just curious, Stacy, do you know, is there talk about having regular school through the summer?
Not regular school. We are having a lot of communications with staff to do a upper level summer schools to get people back on track.
Yeah.
And especially at Carson High and Pioneer, they've looked into really getting those students that have really been devastated by this COVID and this remote learning to bring them up to speed by the time the next school year. But no in-person for summer school, a regular summer school. We're looking at hopefully we do have plans for the fall, depending on the restrictions and how all this goes, to open up full-time for 5 days a week and opening those schools.
Okay, thanks.
But at this point, no. And I haven't heard about graduation. I don't know if we're doing that remote or if we're doing it in person yet. I haven't heard. So hopefully we'll have an update on that soon.
Thank you, Commissioner Wilkie. So moving on, anybody here on, oh, I'm sorry, Jen. Go ahead.
So Commissioner Cartwright texted me her comment. She's an angry baby, so she asked me to read hers. So she wanted to let everyone know that the governor is soliciting feedback on the use of the American Recovery Funds. There's a feedback form that she sent me the link to, so I can email that to everybody. And she's going to submit comments that we should invest in our local parks for infrastructure and quality of life. So I'll email that out to everybody. And thanks to Commissioner Cartwright for that.
Wherever you are.
She's a new baby, so she's got her hands full.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Cartwright. So anybody out there have any ideas for future agenda items that we can share with Jennifer? Well, it's not too late after this meeting. You can always throw her an email. So, all right. With that, is there anybody out there for public comment?
There's no public comment at this time.
Thank you very much. So with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Sorry? Commissioner Kiefer?
Nope.
And Commissioner Schutte? So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Well,
Aye.
good night, everybody.
Good
Thank you
night.
for attending.